Hey, there we go. Hey, good morning, everybody. Hey, hold the speakers. We decided this morning we're all going to do this, so let's go. If they don't do it and they chicken out, make sure you give them a hard time. All right, the 7 deadly diseases. Oh, this is not working. Oh, you have to turn it on. There we go. Oh. There we go. So I'm John Willis, Botchagaloop, my Twitter handle. That's the best way to get a hold of me. And I'm also available for parties. This was actually DevOps Days Austin a couple years ago. We got a bunch of people to jam together. It was pretty awesome. Who am I? I've been doing this for 40 years. Just pretty much an ops guy my whole life. Going back as far as mainframes, work companies like Exxon, Canonical, actually the first private cloud, it was called Ubuntu Enterprise Cloud. I was one of the original evangelists of that. I was early in at Chef. I was the 9th person there. A lot of startups. I sold a company to Dell, and then I sold a company to Dogger. I counted up on about 11 startups over the last 40 years. Most of them miserable failures, but that's what it's all about if you actually want to get into the startup business. Actually counted up about 12 books, and you know what, I call myself like one of the instigators of the DevOps movement. If you've heard, I know Paul's going to make fun of CAMs later in his presentation, so I'm one of the authors of the original Culture, Automation, Measurement, and Sharing. A lot of books. Some of you might have seen the DevOps Handbook. I've done some smaller books, one called Mythbug, and then this is one. It's an audio only. It was just a labor of love. For those of you who run the Phoenix Project, it was based off of a book by Elliot Gorak called The Goal, and Elliot Gorak did a audio project about 20 years after he wrote The Goal called Beyond the Goal. So I talked Gene into doing a Beyond the Phoenix project. I don't know if you have Audible over here, but it's one Audible credit, real simple. So, and then I've got 2 more books coming out this year, the DevOps Handbook, and one that I'll tell you a little bit about near the end of the presentation. I have enough time. This automated governance thing, which is probably the most interesting thing I'm working on right now. But anyway, to set the stage, this what is DevOps, and like we have this kind of identity crisis, right? You know, if you ask 10 people what DevOps is, you get 10 different answers, right? But they're all correct, right? There is no wrong answer. I mean, one of the, Chris had talked about Patrick DeBar. We call him the godfather of DevOps. And, you know, one of the things that I think he's done very, very well is allowed this movement to grow with just the right tension of guardrails. And so the curse of DevOps is we can't definitively say what it is. The beauty of it is it's this magical thing sort of that allows us this freedom to do really creative things, right? But the people come into it like, I want a definition of DevOps. And so a few years ago, this was not to set a definition. It was my own identity crisis where I was asked to actually brief a CEO of a Fortune 1000 company about DevOps. And I realized, you know, as we got closer and closer, like, I was told, hey, you're going to get 5 minutes. And I had like 30 slides. And I'm like, yeah, I got to come up with a better way to do this. And so I literally, for that year, thought about, like, how would I go into a large, you know, 200 billion, 300 billion market cap company and explain DevOps where I had like a couple of minutes. And so this was my answer to the question I asked. And it happened to come at a time when we were doing a lot of research in DevOps, some of what Gene Kim was doing, Dora, Nicole Farstrom, about some science. And, you know, what we kept finding, and, you know, I'm not going to bore you with all that stuff, although it's really, really cool. There's other presentations I've done on that, you know, is that it's about the human factors, right? So today, if I have to get, you know, somebody comes to me, you have to define DevOps in like one sentence, I would say it's a set of practices and patterns that turn human capital into high-performance organizational capital. End of story, right? The tools are cool, but like they don't really matter if you can't get the culture right. And that's just me and my son. One of the beauties of this career is I get to travel around the world and I get to bring my family to a lot of cool places. Not Kyiv yet, but. So this 7 deadly disease thing, right? So I spent a fair amount of my career doing transformation, and then I went into this kind of enclave of working for software companies for about 10 or 11 years. You know, I told you, Chef, Canonical, Docker. There was a short stint of Dell. It was a software project. And then about 2 years ago, I decided I'm going to go out and do transformation without really any products or anchors. And I was going to take all the things I learned, all the tools, what we wrote about in the handbook, and then all the people I've gotten to know that do, you know, really good stuff from transformation, Disney, Nike, a lot of leaders. And I found out that, like, all this stuff gets in the way. Like lean, agile, DevOps, right? Like when you're trying to just figure out what people are doing, what we really need to find out is what are the behaviors, now these are mostly big companies. So I work with like large banks, large insurance companies. And what I want to find out is as much truth in the shortest period of time. And a sure way to get zero truth is to flash fancy words at people that they've never heard. Like safe, agile, even DevOps. You can turn a whole group off by walking in and just like, DevOps, oh, you hadn't read the book. Oh, read the book, come back to me later. Like no, you have to spend time with people. And so what I've found is that what I do now is I don't talk about any specific methodology. I do what I call this organizational forensics. Like and all low tech, no laptops, flip charts. And I interview hundreds of people. And I would say this, I should have made a slide for this. This is this bell curve of change, right? We go in an organization and there's a small group of people, like a 3% or 1.5 or whatever, that like I'll go, let me go. And then we have a small percentage of people that like just stay away from their cancer, they're evil, they're never gonna adapt. But what we do is we actually decide that little small percent that is like easy and adaptable and actually want to change. We categorize everything else as people who don't want to change. And what we don't do is spend a whole lot of time on that fat middle to find out how they can change. Because that small group, right, they might be real simple. They might be a digital or a mobile or something like, we're like throwing CI/CD, doing this and doing that, put them on GitHub, all that stuff, right, is relatively easy. In a big bank or a big insurance company, the hard stuff are the people who have mainframes and 40-year-old middleware virtualization systems and 30-year-old data warehouse systems. And we don't talk to them. We take that cognitive bias of the 3% and we say, thou companies shall DevOps. And so what I do is I talk to that kind of fat middle and I actually listen to them. And it's like water in a desert. That somebody actually comes in and pays attention. Here's a classic story. I got to watch my time. You know, the classic story is that the DevOps group in an organization, you know, they've been ordained by the executives, thou shall DevOps. You know, the water's flying everywhere, and the holy water. I get it. You can laugh too. I mean, if I'm not funny, don't laugh, but you can laugh if you want to laugh. See, somebody laughed. And then we go out and we just start going to these groups and we don't ask any questions, you know. So there's a group that has like this 50-year-old TIBCO. It's a virtualization system. They're in the capital markets. They got day traders that are bringing in ridiculous amount of money. These things have been around for 30 years. They're a bunch of glues with data warehouse systems, all this stuff together. And the DevOps teams come in and says, y'all got a DevOps. Okay, what do we do? Well, the first thing you do is you put everything you got in source control. And they're like, but, no buts. Everything you have has to go to source control. But no buts, I told you. Has to be in source control. So the DevOps person leaves and they're all like, yeah, our system has no source control. It's a middleware system where all the system of truth is in the system. So now, I don't know which one's smart and which one's dumb, but one of them will be like, okay, you know what we'll do? When he comes back, we'll say we're working on it. And now gone for a year. How you doing? We're working on it. Come back next month and it'll be awesome, right? But the other group's like, we're not those kind of guys. What we're going to do is we'll go ahead and every time we do sort of a push through the pipeline, we'll export the XML to some system. Then we'll have a script that'll convert it into YAML. Because it has to be YAML, of course, right? And then we'll convert YAML, and then we'll put it in GitHub. And then we'll start the automated chain. Got it, perfect. 3 months down the line, some problem comes up, a question about system of record, that DevOps group comes storming in, like, how come you didn't use the system of record data? I'm like, well, we kind of had to export it out and put it like that's the point. We do this stuff to that middle, and there's like hundreds of these stories of forcing them. I call it the square peg round hole. The other thing I do is, I love this trick, so if you want to try to, again, going in and handing somebody, here's the point. Like, there's a lot of brilliant presentations, a lot of brilliant speakers about DevOps. But if you walk into a company that's 100 years old and it's got people that have been there 25, 30 years, there's this institutionalized, Adrian Cockcroft calls it the organizational scar tissue. And so one of the things you have to do to get truth is you have to catch people off guard. So when I interview managers, this is fun, right? I don't, like I did the last one, I did like 25 managers, and I don't even introduce myself. I don't like, do you want to know what I do? Nope. I want to ask you this one question real quick, and I want top of the head answers, which is, what are the 5 things your company is not doing that you should do? And next thing you know, they're rattling off like incredible stuff about how things are broken. These are leadership. Like, it's like, and then like somewhere in there, like, oh my God, I can't believe I told you all that. Right? So, and then I aggregate that into like, then you find the patterns and you go back to, CIO and you like, and then the CIO gets furious because they had McKinsey in there for 2 years, spent $4 million, and they couldn't do a simple chart like this. Right? That joke's on me because I ain't making $4 million. So what I found is when I do this work and I go around and I interview, I literally, because the other thing about like the handbook, and it's all great stuff, but sometimes we use it too early. And so, like for example, lean value stream mapping, right? Millions of presentations is an incredible tool. I use it a lot. Again, there's a lot of presentations on it. Donna Martin's book is probably the best book on it. But the thing is that assumes you've already kind of decoupled silos and all this stuff. And what I want to do is I want to talk to people in their kind of natural habitat. Like if you're already institutionalized and you're siloed dev teams and silos infrastructure and siloed cyber, I don't want to put you all together because you're not going to tell me the real truth. So I'll make dev team on Monday, another dev team on Tuesday, people that have worked together for years. And they basically, if you do this cautiously and empathetically, you get them telling you everything that's wrong or what's right or what can be improved about an organization that the leaders never hear. And what I found is that I can bucket these things into 7 categories. 7 because 7's cool. 7 diseases because it gets me selected at conferences. But it's just patterns, right? But the patterns work because I can basically, everything I hear, I can put it in one of these patterns and aggregate and bubble up. And what I tell the people that I interview is I am never going to take the information you told me and directly report that up. But if I hear 3 people say the same thing, that's a pattern. I'm going to bucket it and I'm going to bubble it up. And the patterns allow me to break out. So it would take too long to go through all these. I'm trying to do a whole video series on them because literally each one takes about an hour. And I foolishly, in the beginning of this year, we're trying to do it in 1-hour presentation, so I stopped doing that. But this is the end. So if you fall asleep now after this slide, then that's the last slide. I'm going to just snap through some examples. I got one guy that's laughing. This is awesome. You get a beer, bud. Work, and I'll talk a little more about this. Some I'll cover a little more, a little less. Some are sort of obvious, but capturing work, and I'll talk more about that. It's just amazing to me how much work doesn't get captured, how we have like ridiculous amount of systems and tools that all do the same thing in organizations. One of the worst is ticketing systems. People have 10 different ticketing systems. Incentives, like you can spend a whole lifetime thinking about, like when you talk to people, that's when you get this clarity of incentives. This is like one of my favorite stories. So I get hundreds of these great stories. Like I call it my quote wall that I'm building, right? And so you talk to a couple of dev teams Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday you talk to the infrastructure team. And this is why I want them in their natural habitats. You'd never get this if you put them together. So, and I don't know if this translates well. There's a TV show called Columbo. It's an old guy with a suit, and he's like, plays dumb, but he always figures out how to get the right answers. That's me, man. So I'm like, so on Thursday, I'm going to the infrastructure team, and I go, is there any issues with infrastructure from requests for resources from the software developers, engineers? No. Why do you ask? I'm like, well, kind of heard that every time they ask for like storage or memory, you cut it in half. I'm like, of course we do. They're idiots. Like, where do you get that kind of truth, right? Like, and then it's some folklore about somebody abused it, and like, and then I'm like, point out later, because next week I put them all together, and I point out, well, you're kind of treating these people like kids, and they support day traders that bring in $1 billion a year in revenue. And you're like treating them like 5-year-olds. If they ask for 8 gigs of memory, or say, give it to them. You bring in 0, they bring $1 billion. Like, give them the 16 or 32 or whatever gig they want. That, like, the company has not expressed that equilibrium, right? I mean, this sounds silly, but again, I guess I'm going to go off on this for a couple of minutes because, like, just imagine that you're a 400 billion market cap company, and your infrastructure people are treating people who support day traders who bring in $1 billion. I got to say this one more time, like little kids, by cutting in all of their requests for like disk space, 2019, and this is a reality. Tribal knowledge, we'll talk a little about that. Incongruent organizational design. Hopefully somebody in the next 2 days will talk about microservices and Conway's Law. I'm going to give you one minor example of it. Paul, you going to give me any Conway's Law, microservices, decoupling? Oh, man, Paul, you disappointed me. No. All right, fair enough. And then managing complexity, talk about it. And then here's the thing. It all bubbles down to the thing that really, like, why this all makes sense and why that I can literally, when I'm talking to SEO, sort of drop the mic and say, I told you. That you really, everything that you think you're doing from an audit is just absolute theater. It's phony. Like your people told me it's just total phony, untruth. And so one of the things I do when I get in the groups, right, where, I'll put the development team, and this is like, again, it's actually fun because it's like the psychology of people. So I walk in, and they're all like, oh, another DevOps guy who's going to make my life better, they just the classic consultant that, like, another one I've been told to listen to. And a couple of guys try to chew you up real early to see if you're dumb, like, have you ever heard of TIBCO? Yeah, no, I have, yeah. Have you ever heard of mainframe? Yeah, I actually wrote mainframe assembler like 38 years ago, but yeah, okay. But here's the fun part. So, and then some of them like, I hate DevOps. I'm like, it's fine, we ain't talking about DevOps today. I go to a flip chart and I just draw a box. And they're all like, what is this guy doing? And I said, how does work start? And here's the fun part. For the next hour, they tried to convince me that that's not a good question. Well, John, you don't really understand. That's a complicated question. Yeah, maybe, but where does work start? No, John, you don't understand capital markets or investment banking. I'm like, you're right. Where does work start? And it takes about an hour before they act. So at one point, I used to get mad. Now I'm used to it. Like, it's sort of a character. I'm like, okay, it's Monday morning. You open your laptops. You go to pick something to do. Where did that come from? And then there's this like breakthrough, like, if you must know. I'm like, yeah. Now I can ask the really terrible questions like how much is captured, what percentage, swags. And then in general, what I find is in these large organizations, the ones that are like stellar performers capture about 60% of all the work they do. I'll say on average, everywhere I go, less than 50% of everything they do, there is no electronic record. And so when I go back to the CIO, John, how did we do? I'm like, terrible. In fact, it's really cool because my whole career I had this identity crisis that I couldn't talk to CIOs. Now I show it with sneakers. I mean, literally, I'm tempted to come in with a cigar and throw my sneakers on their desk and go, "All right, bud." But I don't hold back. Like, it's terrible. I'm like, "Okay, John, what do you mean by terrible?" I'm like, "All right, let's start this way. If you built planes, I would not fly on them." "All right, John, you're going to have to explain some examples." I'm like, "Okay." I says, "Sir, respectfully, my guess is you've got over $1 billion IT budget, and you capture 30% of everything that's going on. And I'll ask you, sir, what other part of your business would you tolerate that?" The accountants. "Oh, we have once a month Wednesdays where we roll everything up." Right? Of finance. Like, no other part of your business would you tolerate 60 or 70% of completely unknown work. But like, we're babies. We're little kids in IT. Like, we are little children because like we still live this. And I'm not the kind of person that says everybody has to timestamp and clock. But I don't see how you can make any improvement if you're missing 70% of everything that's going on. No offense to like Atlassian. I just use them as an example because they're a great example to rag on. It just placed the other vendor name in. But like, you can't just, if you just want to go in and get Atlassian suite and swipe it over the organization, and you're only seeing 30% of everything that's going on, I'm like, yeah, I don't know that that's going to work really well. So you have to start figuring out a way to drive an organization, and it's really easy. I mean, conceptually easy, not easy to implement in large places, but teams are sometimes called two-pizza teams, and we take all work and we drive it, and we want to drive the organization such that all work goes to a team who has autonomous control over what they do. And so now you just institute, and now you can actually look at, where the workarounds are. Because I spend a lot of time finding these incredible engineered workarounds, especially in security, that nobody up the chain has ever heard and has no idea. And these are things that have been institutionalized for years. How many people have read The Phoenix Project? Oh, not many. So it's a novel. When you read it, it's basically, you'll recognize your company is it. But there's a really cool thing in there where it's a novel, and it's about like theory of constraints and bottlenecks, and there's a part where they're all arguing. It's about a project that's like 2 years overdue. The CIO is going to get fired, or the VP of engineering is going to get fired because it's 2 years overdue. And there's a point where somebody asks this question like, how come it takes 63 hours to do a 15-minute task? And then somebody, explains, Wes, I guess, says very simplistic queuing theory. It's like I always say, it was a brilliant little paragraph, like my mom could understand Little's Law without knowing like queuing theory. But the way it's simplistically built is like that 15 minutes had 7 downstream dependencies, and all the downstream dependency working groups were 90% busy, and a very simplistic queuing theory would say that it takes 9 hours to get 1 hour's worth of work done. It's very high wash, but the point is that math adds up to 15 minutes, takes 63 hours. And my argument is that if you're only capturing 30% of all the work, so here's what happens. I go to somebody and I'm like, why didn't you make any electronic record for that? Well, that's Sue's team. And Sue is rock solid, and never fails. And you drill in a little bit and you find there's downstream dependencies. And in their mind, it's like 30 minutes. And you start asking about the downstream dependencies, they're like, well, that's not my job. But that 15 minutes they thought that Sue gives them is really parlayed out into hours and hours of other groups that are overworked. But here's the thing, the organization never sees this and can't even attempt to try to classify work. And then the other one is the misalignment, right? Like this is, I gave you some stories about the engineering. Like, do they trust the leadership? I could have done this for free if you just told me up front, CIO, that you had 3 reorgs in last year. All right, we don't have to charge you anything. Like, you got to fix that. You can't have a reorg every 3 months, right? And people are like, I don't know who I work for, or that project now that I officially don't support, but people still call me to support it, and now nobody supports it. You know, the efficiency myth. You know, just a lot of companies still like DevOps, but this must be done by July 4th. Like, you can't have both. Like, you can't be small batch, iterative, and all this stuff and still be date driven. But these companies are. They have this ridiculous split brain. I use this. This is really interesting. I only spent a second on it. It's William Schneider, re-engineering alternative. The only thing is, sometimes you have to look at an organization. He did this real clever thing of breaking an organization, thinking about an organization. This actually works really good for hiring, but you can use it in a lot of ways of like these 4 quadrants of control, competence, collaboration, cultivation. And like, so for example, this is your classic non-DevOps, let's fix. High command and control, you know, hierarchical order structure, very low competence, no collaboration, cultivation, right? That's our classic, let's DevOps apart it, let's break up the sea. That's but sometimes like there's like high control, high competence, maybe leave it alone, right? Like it's a highly controlled, we would say ultimately that doesn't fit most DevOps patterns, but like it's a highly competent. The ones where I get really interested in is really nasty control, but people really like working for this company, like high cultivation. So one of the things I do when I'm interviewing all these people and they're like, this is horrible. No, let me tell you a horrible story. No, I want to tell you a horrible story. And then finally, like, I calm down, everybody. Why do y'all work here? You know, like this profession, there's a lot of openings for jobs. And then you'll get this like, and the companies where I think you have like really good chance to succeed is, I like it here. I like working with the people. The people I work with are really smart, right? And like, okay, that, you know, it's great. So, like, again, I'm not going to give you a whole tutorial on it. I would look at this. You can use this in a lot of effective ways. It's a simplistic abstraction to understand an organization. Here's another one. Again, I'm not going to spend any real time on this. How many people have heard of the Wardley mapping? 1. That was a hand. 2. I fought this for the longest time. I think this is an incredible tool. I am now completely sold. I've used it on the last 2 companies. If you want to open spaces, and I'll tell you why, just think of it as the anti-PowerPoint. It's just a way to actually do multi-dimensional, team-based, moving things around and thinking about your company. And it's an incredible tool. The obligatory, you must have a Conway's Law slide in your DevOps presentation. I'm done with that. So for those who don't know, Conway's Law, organizational design systems are constrained by the designs. It's a communication structure, basically. And here's the thing, you'll hear a lot of presentations about like this, how do you decouple monoliths and microservices being kind of anti-maneuver. But I use this also to take a look at your organizational structure. So how many people over here had heard about the Equifax breach? Not many, really. Okay, it is the, cost-wise, it's the worst cyber breach in the history. They lost $5 billion in market cap. And that doesn't even count how much they've lost in lost cost opportunity. But anyway, this is unfair. Does anybody recognize anything odd about this? He already gets a beer. Whoever answers this one gets a second beer or wine. If you can tell me what you think is wrong about this organizational structure. Bonus, if you can tell me how it applies to Conway's Law. The CSO, too late. The CSO reports to the chief legal officer. Guess what, folks? They're not a software company. They didn't think, and here, this report, if you want to see like a cyber accident in detail, if you're one of those people that love these like disaster stories, they interview the CISO, and at one point they ask her, this is congressional testimony, right? When you found out the PII, the personal identifier data, people's records. Equifax, sorry if you don't know, Equifax is a credit bureau, right? So they have everything. And you don't opt in either. Like they have everything. And they asked her, why didn't you tell the CIO about the breach? And she said, I just didn't think about it. And like, that's Conway's law. So Conway's law applies to organizational structures. Like, her responsibility, the way she thought, the organizational structure of how she thought was bounded by whatever she thought her boss, which was purely legal. And if you're not thinking like a software company, then like you know, these people say we're a software company, and then you ask about their structure, and if the CIO reports to the chief financial officer, probably not a software company. Because guess what? Nike's a software company. Disney's a software company. Barclays Bank is a software company. So there's this notion of what they call functional oriented, or how many people have heard the notional they call I-shaped individual or T-shaped? Okay, a few. All right, good. You read the handbook. Hey, thank you. So this notion of an I-shaped is your classic, like, you're an Oracle DBA, and that's all you do. So T-shaped might be you handle all the databases, relational and non-relational. You know how to do Python. You've got kind of like a broad horizontal skill set, but you're kind of deep in you really understand relational database. And so there's this whole movement of trying to take organizations and take all the I-shaped people and make them more T-shaped. And ultimately, this notion of E-shaped is sort of, I don't like the term full stack, but where you have a lot of skills. So you're very adaptable. And a lot of companies who are trying to do kind of grand scale transformation they notionally are thinking, like, how do I create the people who work for me? How do I hire people so that they can be adaptable? They can do security one day. They can write Go code. They can do Kubernetes. They can do network stuff. Kind of like not the best at any of them. So there's this notion that Scott Pruitt, CSG, talks about, like, this build-run teams, and the idea that you start, every service is a fully functional team of everything you need to manage that team, right? Your security, network, development, engineer, everything you got. And actually very important, a product owner too, so which become a liaison. And to most companies, this looks like redundancy. Like, why would I have, like, every service have a network? Why would I have it? What it is it's you're paying off some technical debt to create an organization of E-shaped people. So if you buy another company, or you merge, or like if something magically happens in 3 years where Kubernetes is obsolete, because remember, Kubernetes is 5 years old, right? Believe me, in 5 years, what? Yeah, well, there you go, right? Nomad, hey, Nomad, no. I jest. But the point is, like, I got to be ready for that. And I want my organization to be very adaptable and have these broad sets of skills. So as serverless. If you've got E-shaped individuals, serverless is like, okay, another form of compute, cool. And then, there's a whole, drilling in about, like, thinking complexity. Like, start thinking about your organizations as complex adaptive systems, and stop thinking that you can control them and that you'll know exactly what they're going to do next Wednesday, at 3 p.m. Because these systems are, there's this thing called physics, and it just gets in the way of all things. And it makes, and so, like, starting, and again, I can give you a ton of reading if this is interesting, of people who are doing incredible work in IT that try to explain that, first off, start thinking systems thinking. Start embracing complexity, because it will solve a lot of things like blamelessness and eradicate root cause thinking. And then pluralist to ignorance is where, like, everybody sort of thinks everybody else agrees, so nobody says anything. Let's see what my time is, because I got to tell you the Abraham Wald story. So one of the things I realized, so I study a lot of different disciplines that are not IT, and one is the area of, like, people who think about complexity in aviation and healthcare. Sidney Dekker, Richard Cook, these are some really great authors. John Osbar, actually, is a DevOps guy who's introduced this work. So there's this story of this guy, Abraham Wald, World War II statistician. And during World War II, the U.S. put together this team of mathematicians and statisticians to try to figure out the most efficient way to repair damaged, bullet hole airplanes. And they'd use, heavy math stats to figure out what the proper metal, how to, fortify. And this wall guy, somewhere along the way, go like, oh my God, we got this all wrong. We're trying to fix where the bullet holes are, right? Because those are the planes that are coming back. The planes that are not coming back are where the bullet holes aren't, right? And there's a really kind of sort of metaphoric idea here that Sidney Decker, who's a writer, again, some really good books, Drift to Failure, he talks about using this in systems where instead of trying to tell everybody how to do great things, go find the people who figure out how to do things in places that are impossible to do things and follow them around and just take notes. And I do this now. I recently interviewed at a big company, 25 managers. And this company was just dog ugly, a lot of reorgs. And I couldn't get anybody to tell me ownership of all these different products, new products, all this, except for out of 25, one person knew where everything was. So I asked him, I pulled the iron wall. I'm like, how come you know this? And for a second he thought, he had to think about it, right? He said, well, you know what it is? I make myself accessible. People know they can come to me and ask me any question, and I always deliver the answer. And half the time I don't know the answer, but I always find the answer. And I guess that's why I know where everything is. So when I go back, I'm like, let's cultivate this person, because this works, right? So find those people in an organization that seem to know, in a place that's just will take us 20 years to fix. Maybe alternative is just find those people that just figure out how to get everything done. Everybody knows a person like that in a company. Oh, just go to Sue. It'll get done. Well, then figure out what Sue does and try to replicate it. And then security. So it all kind of bubbles down to this, what you think you're doing, you're not really doing. You've got all these artificial human proxies. Some companies 6 different type review boards. Architecture review, the product review, the cab. I mean, there was one company that was so invested in a job scheduling system that they actually had a review board. So they had coupled their job scheduling XML into the production applications. So they actually had an XML, job scheduling review board. Oh my God, shoot me now. So and these are all just subjective, I tell you I'm going to do this. You're like, that looks like a pretty complex system. Yeah, I think it's okay. And then you look at it and say, well, it's going on my system. I guess if he says okay and he says okay, right? So Toil at Capital One, he's a leader in our industry. And I'll talk about a project we're working on together. When he started out, it's called automated governance. He went and he found out at Capital One, this is a pretty advanced company, that most of their core banking changes at Capital One had 53 approvers. So he went ahead and started interviewing all the approvers. Only 3 of them ever read the change. And the 3 that read the change usually are like, I don't know what an API in Kubernetes is. I guess I'll check it off. They must know what they're doing. Pluralistic ignorance, by the way. So then he realized, okay, now I've got my evidence to really, that's not my time. Okay, I got 38 minutes, but I thought I had 45 minutes. No? Okay, all right. So let me run through this real quick and I'll get some questions. So one other area too, I worry a lot about this in large corporations, you got this classic ITSM, ITIL, and then you got cloud native going on, and they're just getting so far apart, that like a large corporation on one end really thinks they have a CMDB, and then on the other end they're doing some like exotic cloud native stuff, and so then I'm like, they don't like me. I never get hired back a second time because I piss everybody off. But like, how am I? So Toil says, John, 5 years ago I had 400 applications. Now I have 40,000 applications. Microservices, right? I mean, once you start like decoupling, like these become atomic services. So they have a lot of the properties. So there's a downsize to decoupling monoliths. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. And then so if we're still thinking our organization's service catalog and all this, where does, I'll talk about delivery mesh in a second. Service mesh and even SLOs and SRE and all that. It doesn't fit. There's no place for it. Nobody's even having an honest industry conversation about these things. So one, we either get rid of ITIL, or we have an honest conversation about how do we get these things to actually make sense? Because right now, that's the race, and they're both going, one's going way fast and one's going really slow. And companies don't even want to think about this honest conversation of Istio Envoy, that's table stakes. But it's a lot of stuff going on in the table stakes. And then we're not even getting into what things called super meshes or things like Spiffy that are how we start identifying token-based services within the mesh. And then if some of you are exploring with Kubernetes API extensibility and kind of custom resource, I'm sorry if this is all new to you. If some of you know this, it doesn't matter. If you work in a large organization, these are things that are going to be happening. And there is nobody in an organization right now that I know of that is thinking about how to create some type of service management concept around this stuff. And it's moving at an incredibly fast pace. And then this notion of we're all, I say we all, but the people who are hip to Kubernetes knows what Istio Envoy is, right? But then we concentrate on that, but then what's the left-hand side? What is configuration? What is a service mesh pre-delivery to the service mesh? How does configuration management work? What does deployment orchestration look like before it gets orchestrated? Where do you put the middleware? Do you put it in the same cluster? Again, I only have a few minutes for questions. Things like Notary or Tough, signed containers. How many people heard of Open Policy, OPA? Nobody. This is our problem. How many people heard of Kubernetes? Huh? Yeah. I'm not dinging you or anything. I'm just saying that OPA is basically, and I don't even think it's even a great tool, but conceptually it is a policy agent. It's part of CNCF to basically drive what can happen in Kubernetes. So we got gazillions of people on the planet. Next week there'll be 40 billion people walking around going, the zombies of Kubernetes. And all they'll be thinking about is getting Docker and Kubernetes up. I go to session, tells me how to do Docker. And I love Kubernetes. I worked at Docker, and I think this is cool stuff, but how is it going to work when you're running? So Dwayne Holmes at Marriott runs $40 billion worth of revenue. He says this publicly, through Kubernetes. There's a lot of stuff that has to happen to be able to do that. Other than just, I install Docker. APIs, serverless. How many people do pen testing on API trees? It's about the average, 2 or 3 hands. Banks. Look at, you start finding that there are these often APIs that get customer ID, wide open. This is sort of a DevSecOps. And that's a couple more minutes. So the last thing I've been, I'll just finish up here. The thing I've been working on, it's something that, it's kind of this mini book that'll be out probably end of summer, called Automated Governance. And the idea is to change subjective attestation. So attestation is what we do in the change advisory board or checklist. We make attestations that some policy people say we must have these things to get audited or when we get audited. And so normally most companies use this kind of human subjective way of doing this. And there's a small movement of people that I've been working with trying to turn that into sort of objective, sort of blockchain, but really signature certificate authority like attestations that are basically immutable. So auditor looks at a hash and we're done because it's immutable math and there's no way that it could be broken until quantum computing breaks everything. But so this idea that in DevOps we walk in and we tell a CIO get rid of the cab and they're like, yeah, but how? Well, it doesn't matter, get rid of the cab. But how? I got to do an audit, right? And so this is really a movement around a couple of big companies I'm working with, actually Microsoft, Nike, Marriott, Capital One, PNC Bank, of trying to transform the cab to more of an objective. And then at the end result is turn these 30-day audits into like a half a day. Because you could literally just show like kind of a distributed ledger or a signature or some type of hash event that is, again, immutable truth. Longer conversation, but this is sort of what we've been working on. If anybody wants to geek on this in an open spaces, I'll go much deeper. But the idea that like you look at each part of the chain in terms of control points, actors, and actions, and the control points become attestations. And so what you do is try to figure out. And so I'll just go right to here. Like this is what we did is we did a reference architecture that we're going to kind of open source, and then we took an example of a microservice. And we just picked tools, like how would we do certain control points as evidence, and where would it manifest from, and not really recommendations, just trying to use one example of a single Java microservices that's going to go into a container, and then like each one of these would be these, like you have to show proof that there was a pull request, there was a peer review, there was a unit test, there was, and you walk through. Anyway, that's all I got, folks.
All right, let's have questions then. Anyone? Hey. Did you guys listen to the presentation or what?
Be brave and mighty forces will come to your aid.
We have a question. Right.
Thank you for the talk.
You're welcome.
I have one question about, you mentioned on previous year that you will release DevSecOps handbook this year.
Yes.
Do you have any dates?
The goal is the DevOps Enterprise Summit in Vegas. I think the goal would be, it's like with the handbook, we'll actually give out probably free copies of what they call NFR. That means they're not fully done, but they're bounded. And they're actually really good because usually a lot of stuff gets cut out. So it's kind of good. So that would be the goal. I would suspect that it won't be like orderable on Amazon probably till early 2020. But we'll have bounded deliverable copies, not for distribution copies, in Vegas.
Thank you. And another question.
Sure.
I saw on your Twitter last week, I think, about DevOps Kaizen draws. Do you have any better versions? I saw only like photos from the iPhone, like from the phone. I mean, do you have some paper or
yeah?
a
So
PDF?
if you go to my GitHub, that Botchka loop, right? I've got like every presentation pretty much I've done for the last 8 years. And there was I do themed presentations, like each year I kind of start with some idea and work it through the year. So it was like last year before I had a whole Kaizen thing, and there was a company I went to just last week who wanted me to do that one. And so I do have a lot of presentations and videos on that notional of how adopting a lot of stuff from Lean, how you think about Lean in our type of work, and this, how Kaizen. And I will tell you that one book would be 80% of my messaging is Mike Rother's Toyota Kata. It's only about Toyota, not about IT, but like that to me is the single one book. If you really want to understand the best way to understand Lean, it's my favorite all-time book. So that'll set this mindset of what I think DevOps Kaizen is. So Mike Rother, Toyota, and I'll be around, but it's a fabulous book. So.
Another question from me. So do you plan this new book to be available on Audible?
Yeah, it will be. It's all through Gene's IT Revolution. So now every book that they put out, they make sure that it has the three. It will have audio, and then it will have E, and then physical. So it's kind of a machine now. So yes, it will be like day one. It should be Audible.
Well, this is great. I would definitely recommend.
By the way, it's case
Audible.
studies, and I didn't mention that one of the authors on it is Shannon Leitz. So if you want to actually see one of the most amazing security people in our industry, bar none, Shannon Leitz. She runs a 50-person red team at Intuit. So she has a 50-person team that's full-time job, works for her, to just spend all day attacking their own systems. The stuff that she does is incredible. The forensics she does to security is the most advanced banks are in awe when they hear what she does. And she'll be writing all about that in the book. So.
More questions, anyone? Oh.
Yeah, thanks for the talk.
Sure.
So my question is about that objective
Attestation, change the subjective. Yeah.
Would it somehow end up with something like a standard, like SOC 2 or ISO that everyone trying to get their company attested? So,
Yeah. So right now the goal was to. Again, I don't know if the goosebumps, like you get chills. I'm sitting there watching the guy from Marriott, the guy who runs Azure, and the person who runs Capital One all debate what are the best control points for attestation. You can't write a movie that awesome to sit there in that room. So what our goal was to create this kind of kitchen sink of a reference architecture of like 5 or 6 common. By the way, Mike Nygaard was also on the team. So if you've ever done circuit breaker patterns, thank him. He invented the idea in a book called Release It. And the idea was this sort of this would be really cool across all those boxes. And so that will be the original reference architecture. And then the use case is to say, here's how we did it. And then, at that point, then it's all based on what you need and your policy people need. And then the envision is that as people start maturing, first we need a lot of people to break it. This is 6 people, really smart people, but once we get it up on GitHub, take your architecture and do a pull request. Tell us where we got it wrong or right? But at some point at that maturity level, yes, then I envision, I don't talk about this now because it'll be way too far ahead and it will confuse people, but certainly at some point we will have templates that will be compliance-based templates that universally can be shared within industries. Then ultimately that would be a goal. But right now we're still kind of crawling, crawl, walk, run, kind of crawl. Let's make sure that we actually can come up with 7 or 8 people agreeable reference architecture, open it up to hundreds of people agree. And then once that starts manifesting, then, industries can start defining specific compliance templates. And it's going to be all Creative Commons, all open source. The whole, this is not going to be anything closed. So the idea is just to get everybody on the same page, to actually try to create environments that aren't security theater, that really can actually, auditors can literally walk in and look at a hash and say, just like I trust RSA encryption, I trust that couldn't be broken. We're done with that part of the audit.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so please go drink coffee or smoke cigarettes for 20 minutes, and we'll be glad to see you all back.